Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg. This week, Tony is delivering our bad idea. And I do mean delivering, Tony.
This week, we're going to be talking about attachment therapy and rebirthing.
Did you see what I did there with the delivery?
I did. I actually was laughing about that. I thought it was very, very good. Better than usual on the punnery.
So, rebirth. I know a very small amount about this because you've talked about this in the past, or I possibly have heard it from other people. But tell us, what is the bad idea about this rebirth? What is going on here?
Well, essentially, rebirth therapy is a smaller part of attachment therapy, and that is a sort of controversial type of therapy based around attachment theory. And attachment theory is saying that we build bonds with our parents or with people in our tribe or people close to us, essentially because of the need for survival. It's all pretty simple stuff. But attachment therapy is usually applied whenever a child is taken out of their living situation and into either adoptive care or foster care. And whenever these children are unable to make bonds with these new guardians, it's usually applied there.
So basic principle, you have understandable attachments to the people that you've grown up with. Yep. Now you're not with them anymore for whatever reason, and you're with us, so we're gonna make you attached to us?
Yes, that's essentially it. And a lot of times, it's not even that they're so much attached to their original parents, it's that they haven't really been given the skill sets to act normally in a situation, like especially kids that have suffered from a lot of neglect or things like that. It's like if a toddler refuses to be around familiar adults, has major mood swings and rage, or simply can't connect with a caregiver, some would call that an attachment disorder. Sometimes it manifests by trusting complete strangers over the other caregiver as well, and there's just a whole list of other things.
That sounds like some major problems. I was going to say, in sort of response to the first thing, that in some of the training that I've had to do because I'm a foster parent, we learned that you've really got to be a bad person to not have your kid like you, like at like a young age. All right. I mean, people can do horrible things to their kids and the kids will still be really upset when you take them away from their parents. 5-year-olds aren't ever or nearly never sitting thinking like, man, I wish I wasn't in this house anymore.
It takes a lot. It's not like being a teenager where you might be great parents and they hate you for no reason for a little bit because they're moody.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's part of life. But as far as like young kids coming out of their home, that's always going to be traumatic. No matter how bad that home already was, it's going to be an extra level of problems for them.
And I imagine whenever you actually get a kid from a foster system, it's always kind of bracing for impact to see how they're going to react in your home and everything. There's just so much that goes into that.
This is not foster care stories, Tony, but one of the children that I had, lovely little boy, but he just pooped on the floor. Not because he didn't know better. I think he legitimately was like testing the limits of what would happen if he, did something so blatantly like this is not okay.
Yeah, just
it may have also been anxiety.
Out.
Yeah, I've seen, and the one I have right now, we got him as an infant, so really no. He spent more time with us than he has with his real mom at this point, like by a large margin. But
yeah, it's a lot of that. I imagine as an infant, it's an entirely different thing. So we'll cover some of the other things that are on this list. Some of the side effects. I'm sure pooping on the floor would actually be on this list.
We're often sort of the tangent land. Let's get back to this attachment therapy.
There are two types of recognized attachment disorders in the DSM-5. This reactive attachment disorder is usually characterized by markedly disturbed, developmentally appropriate ways of relating socially in most contexts. In this more pseudoscientific one, it's actually something where it's hard to diagnose, so a lot of people end up going online and just finding these long checklists and seeing if their kid fits into these boxes. Especially whenever a child comes into a house either as a new adoptee or into foster care and can't attach to someone for emotional or personal growth.
Now, what time frames are we talking about here? Because you're just like, it's just not gonna happen in the first like week or two, like legitimate attachment.
Yeah, oftentimes this actually can go for several years before And people are setting up therapy and they are trying to go through traditional methods. And a lot of times whenever they get to this level where they're seeing unlicensed psychotherapists, that's whenever they've been at it for a while, usually.
And I know we're going to get into some bad stuff here, but in maybe ill-advised defense of some of these parents, I think that it can be very challenging. It can be very challenging to deal with the child who is... Well, any child, first of all, parenting is kind of
a good kid is a hard thing to manage sometimes. Like, my niece is one of the best kids on the planet, and occasionally she has a real rough day.
Yeah, and I don't know about this attachment aversion or whatever thing that this, like, I don't know about that, but I guarantee you most of these kids had some real, actual psychological problems from their situations.
Very much so. And according to a task force set up by the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, APS-AC from now on, they found that these non-specific behaviors such as developmental lags, destructive behaviors, refusal to make eye contact, cruelty to animals and siblings, lack of cause and effect thinking, preoccupation with fire, blood, and gore, poor peer relationships, stealing, lying, lack of conscience, persistent nonsense questions or incessant chatter, poor impulse control, abnormal speech patterns, fighting for control over everything, and hoarding or gorging on food, and the list goes on and on and on. And according to some of these websites, if your child exhibits like 3 or 4 of those, they have an attachment disorder.
I was going to say, them persistent nonsense questions. I better get to a rebirther.
That is just kids. My nephew will ask you 5 million questions on a 7-minute car ride. It's just,
I get the ones where
stops.
It's the same question over and over. Like, Daddy, can we do this? I said, I already said that we could. Are you looking for a different answer? Yes, you can play the Switch. Why did you ask me again? Like, now I'm just inclined to say no now because I still have to answer this question. I'm not a very great dad.
See, my nephew's always the why question. We're sitting there in like a gondola over the mountains, and he's wondering why he can't open the door. And we explain. And he's like, "Why would I fall?" And it's like, "Well, gravity." And we start explaining that to him. And he's like, "But why?" And it just goes on forever. But anyway,
that's just him pushing your buttons.
Yes. No, I have fun with it, but that's fine. APS-AC Task Force basically printed out these lists saying that these are the types of things that people are putting out there trying to justify this sort of attachment therapy. It's a pseudoscience with a whole myriad of treatments, some more extreme than others. In one of the pamphlets that came out from this task force as well, they detailed what a typical treatment looks like. The center induces rage by physically restraining the child and forcing eye contact with the therapist. The child must lie across the laps of 2 therapists looking up at one of them. In a workshop handed out prepared by 2 therapists at the center, the following sequence is described. Therapist force control, which produces child rage. Rage leads to capitulation to the therapist, as introduced by the child breaking down emotionally. The therapist takes advantage of the child's capitulation by showing nurturance and warmth. This new trust allows the child to accept control by the therapist and eventually the parent. According to the protocol, if the child shuts down and refuses to comply, he or she may be threatened with detainment for the day at the clinic or forced into a temporary foster home. This is explained to the child as a consequence of not choosing to be a good family boy or girl. If the child is actually placed in foster care, the child is then required to earn their way back to therapy and choose to resume living with the adoptive family.
Okay.
A central feature of these therapies is the use of psychological, physical, or aggressive means to provoke the child into catharsis, ventilation of rage, or sorts of acute emotional discharge. To do this,
a really great way to get somebody to love you is to force them to earn your love.
Yeah,
that's what I've noticed. You're only really a member of the family and loved if you're earning it.
Yes. What? Especially when you do it this way. A variety, of course, of techniques are used, including scheduled holding, binding, ribcage stimulation, i.e. pinching or knuckling, and or licking. Children may be held down, may have several adults lie on top of them, or their faces may be held so they can force to engage in prolonged eye contact. Sessions may last from 3 to 5 hours, with some sessions reportedly lasting longer. Similar but less physically coercive approaches may involve holding the child and psychologically encouraging the child to vent anger towards his or her biological parent.
I know you're probably going to get into some examples of this in a little bit. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is this something that people would do after they had sought help from an actual, actor? and not quacks?
Sometimes if they did the internet search on what to do with this, they would go straight to these doctors. Sometimes they were legitimately referred by psychologists.
Oh, well, that makes me even less confident in the advice that I was about to give, which is if you are a foster parent and you're like having some difficulties, one of the benefits of the foster system is that they do support the kids as much as they can with like actual therapy. You don't have to pay for that out of pocket. Like the state understands that this is a traumatic experience, and they do attempt to, smooth over that stuff. If the psychologist that you send this kid to though is then sending him to this treatment, I don't know what to do.
Well, this was also at the beginnings of a new style of attachment therapy treatment before there were any studies on it. Which, to be fair, there aren't very many studies on it now, and we'll get into the reasons for that.
I can figure out why. It's abuse.
But during this time period in the late 80s, there were a lot of people that thought that it might be effective, and they were sending people and referring people to them. That's in the 80s, it was mostly referrals and pamphlets that were going out from various doctors sending people to these people. Later, it would be the internet tests and everything else that we were talking about. This is extreme, but it's not the main concern that I have. In the videos I watched, the therapists are rather violent with the kids, forcing them down and shouting at them. But this is more traumatic than it is dangerous, and I know the long-term effects are massive for that sort of thing, but the danger comes from a therapy called rebirthing.
So we have something even worse than tie a kid down and scream at him and force him to maintain eye contact to help him not have mental problems.
Yes, to help him forget his other parents and love you more. Apparently.
I don't want to diminish the difficulty that I'm sure some of these parents may have had, because I believe that there's probably some of these situations where the kids were legitimately very trying. However, even so, like, no to that treatment. But we're getting worse. That's not the bad idea. We have an even worse idea here.
No, this is all a bad idea, but the real bad idea is about to happen now. Rebirthing is an aspect of attachment therapy in which a child is wrapped in blankets from head to toe and is held down by several adults. These adults try to make the child struggle, often for more than a half hour, to rebirth themselves out of these blankets. Usually the adults would repeat mantras about rebirth and give encouragement to the child, who would slowly work themselves out of the blankets and into the arms of their awaiting parent. If done right, this is difficult but not overwhelming. The child struggles, and by the time they find their way out, they're now able to forge connections with their new guardians and therapists. Their new life starts that day.
This actually doesn't sound as crazy as the other thing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking whenever I was reading about it. It's more whenever it's applied poorly.
Yeah, because, I mean, it seems like if you give somebody a physical... Now, I still think it seems a little bit weird. But if you give somebody a something to overcome, an obstacle, right? And it's like you're giving them that win, essentially. And also, now there's a whole bunch of like weird Freudian stuff wrapped up in the idea that this is a birth. I could see like deriving some positive psychological thing from overcoming a physical difficulty like this. I mean, for me, honestly, that's part of the reason that I run. It's because I'm a little bit miserable when I do it sort of physically, but mentally it's like, yeah, I'm pushing myself, I'm doing it, and when I'm done, like, it makes me feel better.
It's vitally important to the happiness and to have some struggle in your life that you can get through. Also, I feel like this one sort of has echoes of like a baptism type feel, where it's like, this is whenever like things restarted for you. Like that sort of idea is kind of wrapped into this.
Yeah, whatever you think about baptism, it should be relatively safe. Like, you're not supposed to hold them under for, an hour.
We're going to talk about what went severely wrong, though, and about a girl named Candace Newmaker. Candace was born in Lincolnton, North Carolina, to Angela and Todd Elmore. At a young age, she and her brother Michael and sister Chelsea were removed from home for neglect and separated by social services. When she was 5, her parents' parental rights were terminated. 2 years later, she was adopted by Jean Newmaker, a single woman and a pediatric nurse practitioner in Durham, North Carolina. Within months of the adoption, Jean began taking Candace to a psychiatrist, complaining about her behavior and attitude at home. Though Candace was treated with medications, Jean reported that Candace's behavior got worse. During the ensuing 2 years, a period supposedly included her playing with matches and killing goldfish. Jean Newmaker was referred from her psychologist to a 2-week intensive therapy session in Evergreen, Colorado. that was supposed to help with attachment disorders. She dropped $7,000 and flew out west. Connell Watkins, an unlicensed psychotherapist, was set to run the therapy session with her colleague Julie Ponder.
The unlicensed part is really giving me some pause here.
Yeah, like, I don't even know how you set up something like this and actually have people come to you as an unlicensed psychotherapist. Like, maybe there's better regulations now, but I don't know how you can actually practice that way.
I mean, to be fair, like, digging around in somebody's brain, not literally, obviously, it's kind of like wishy-washy type work anyway. Like, it might be difficult to say exactly how that's supposed to be done, but I think that there should be some minimum amount of certification that you have to do from, like, other psychologists and stuff.
Yeah, but it's like, do holistic doctors have to be certified?
No, because that's not real.
I think they have a process that makes it real to them.
Okay. So the holistic doctor thing, you're like doing homeopathy and iridology and like looking at horoscopes and stuff. Like, none of those things are directly going to hurt anybody. They're going to hurt you if you think that that's going to cure your cancer and you don't go to the hospital. But that's a little bit of a different situation than we're going to wrap you up in a blanket that you can't get out of.
Yeah. After much of the holding therapy and several days of other attachment therapies, it was decided that they would do a rebirthing. Following the script for that day's treatment, Candace was wrapped in a flannel sheet and covered with pillows to simulate a womb or birth canal and was told to fight her way out of it, with the apparent expectation that the experience would help her attach to her adoptive mother. 4 of the adults, weighing a combined total of 673 pounds, used their hands and feet to push on Candace's head, chest, and 70-pound body to resist her attempts to free herself while she complained, pleaded, and even screamed for help and air. Unable to escape from the sheet, Candace stated 11 times during the session that she was dying, to which Ponder responded, "You want to die? Okay, then die. Go ahead, die right now." 20 minutes into the session, Candace had vomited and excreted inside of the sheet. She was nonetheless kept restrained within. 40 minutes into the session, Jean said to Candace, "This baby doesn't want to live. She's a quitter." Candace faintly responded, "No," and this would ultimately be her last word. To this, Ponder replied, "Quitter, quitter, 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 quit, 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 she's a quitter." Jean Newmaker, who said she later felt rejected by Candace's inability to be reborn, was asked by Watkins to leave the room, in order for Candace not to pick up on Jean's sorrow. Soon thereafter, Watkins requested the same of McDaniel and Britta St. Clair, who were the other 2 people in the room that were helping with this therapy, leaving only herself and Ponder in the room with Candace. After talking for 5 minutes, the 2 unwrapped Candace and found that she was motionless, blue on the fingertips and lips, and not breathing. Upon seeing this, Watkins declared, "Oh, there she is. She's sleeping in her own vomit." Whereupon the mother, who had been watching on a monitor in the other room, rushed into the room, remarked on Candace's collar, and began CPR while Watkins called 911.
I can't imagine why this person couldn't get, like, licensed as a psychiatrist.
Yeah, it's a mystery. It really is.
Just like one of those weird things about the world.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously she had lots and lots of training about how to help people and stuff.
Yeah, and totally understood that putting 600 pounds of people on top of a child is totally a good way to help them.
How old is this kid again, by the way?
10 years old. She's just shy of 11.
Like, the animosity and the coldness from her. I mean, I know she killed the kid, okay, through her stupidity. But that's, like, almost to me, like, incidental to the fact that she killed the kid while demeaning her for the thing that she put her through.
How, in any way, is that going to improve her psychological state, being smothered and forced to climb out while somebody calls her a quitter and all sorts of other things?
It's not football practice.
Yeah.
And by the way, maybe it shouldn't be that way at some football practices either, because I've been hearing about some of y'all coaches that killed your players because you didn't listen to them saying, "I'm dying."
Yeah, or the ones that are like, "I'm thirsty," and they're like, water's for after practice. You got to get tough. I had coaches that thought like that for a little bit, and then a kid in Minnesota died of dehydration, and we were forced to take water breaks every 30 minutes.
Good for the people who forced you to do that.
Yeah, well, it was the coach deciding that he was being stupid, so good on him.
Can I just take a second and give a big shout out to people who, like, can look at themselves and say, "Wait a minute, no, I guess I was doing the wrong thing." There is not nearly enough of that in the world. And shout out to your coach. This is another tangent that I'm taking us on, and I'm sorry, but I think if there was more of that, we would have less of this.
Yeah,
of
less
what we're
bad
talking
ideas,
about.
less pseudoscience, less insanity for this sort of thing. I'm not going to get into the rest of the details because it's just very depressing on the actual death. Like, she made it to Denver and she passed the next day. The entire 70 minutes of the fatal session, as well as 10 hours of other sessions from the preceding days, had been videotaped as a way of proving the effectiveness of Watkins' treatment. All the videos were shown for the trial of Watkins and Ponder. So in the name of a baseless pseudoscience, we have a 10-year-old girl dead on the ground, mostly because a guardian couldn't handle the stress of raising a child with behavioral problems. Which, by the way, most adoption agencies, if things aren't working out, you actually can have them take the child back. 10 to 25% of adoptions get sent back because it's just not working with the family. Like, that's a better option than going to some pseudoscientist thing that could actually hurt the child.
And I wanted to reiterate, because I kind of said this at the beginning, but parenting is hard. Like, no shade on you if you're struggling as a parent, even
especially as a single mom. Like, it's hard.
And you're a single mom who's gotten somebody with a lot of issues. Like, that is not her fault. And I think she was probably trying to do the best thing for her kid. Maybe she should have realized that this was a problem before now, but at least she had the decency to...
It's like she was committed. $7,000 in 1989 is a lot of money to try to put a kid through a therapy.
Yeah, it's a lot of money now.
Almost a year to the day later, Watkins and Ponder were tried and convicted of reckless child abuse, resulting in death, and received 16-year prison sentences.
Good.
Britta St. Clair and Jack McDaniel, the therapeutic foster parents, like the simulated ones that were holding the pillows, pleaded guilty to criminally negligent child abuse and were given 10 years probation and 1,000 hours community service as part of a plea bargain. The adoptive mother, Jean Newmaker, pleaded guilty to neglect and abuse charges and was given 4-year suspended sentence, after which the charges were expunged from her record. An appeal by Watkins against the conviction of the sentence failed, and after 7 years she was paroled. And she's now under intense supervision with restrictions on contact with children or doing any sort of counseling work. The case also generated enduring controversy about attachment therapy. It was the motivation behind Candace's law in Colorado and North Carolina, which outlawed dangerous reenactments of the birth experience. The U.S. House of Representatives and Senate have separately passed resolutions urging similar actions in other states. I couldn't find out which other states have actually banned this. Like, I just did not think to do that in my research, but I'm sure a few others have as well.
I gotta say, well, unless you have a lot more, information here, it sounds like this is a horrifying experience, and for this kid, like, it's terrible that this happens. It doesn't sound like this is necessarily an epidemic.
No, it's a pseudoscience that went a little bit far, and things like this actually caused it to go backwards. You will still find people on YouTube as proponents of this, usually to a lesser degree. Usually it's more about, like, comfortably holding the child and working on breathing exercises and trying to do other things. I'm sure that the rebirthing stuff still happens occasionally, but it's not a huge thing. It's not facilitated communication. It's nothing quite that huge.
I mean, we could quibble about, like, exactly how much time the people involved should have gotten and, whether or not that's fair, and yeah, they killed a kid and stuff, but it does at least sound like, in general, the consequences were there. Like,
yeah, they
nobody
were metered
was asleep
out
at the switch, just letting this stuff happen.
Yeah, it's not like they walked for it. They definitely had to give up their careers. 7 years doesn't seem like near enough to me, but, like, I understand that it wasn't intentional homicide.
Yeah.
And
again, we could debate the specifics of exactly how the punishment happened, but it's going to be an imperfect system no matter what. I'm just glad to hear these people had to pay something.
And I was reading about some of the reasons why these therapies became so attractive for a short period of time, and various agencies said that it was because the focus was on absolving the guardians of their guilt for not being able to control their child's issues. That it put all of the blame squarely on the biological parents and on the upbringing of the child. And in some ways, after a few years of dealing with a very hard child to deal with, they were just looking for something that would help ease their guilt as well as desperately trying to find a therapy that would work. So I can't blame the parents entirely for this. It's just, it seems like it would be common sense that holding a kid down and screaming at them isn't going to fix the underlying issues that are causing this behavior.
Oh, and it might not have been their fault to begin with, right? I can't pass judgment on a parent for not being able to fix someone's, problems that they came into their home with through a lifetime of abuse or neglect or whatever. It may have just permanently scarred them, and they either weren't able to get through to them or weren't, happy with how much they were able to get through, because you might see some improvement, but not have it, turn out exactly like you'd like. I'm 100% on board with that, I guess is what I'm saying. The fact that, you're going to feel bad if you aren't able to fix these kids, especially because if you go, I assume I went into fostering because I thought, hey, I'm going to help some people out. I'm going to do the best that I can. I had a situation where there was a little boy who was relatively violent occasionally towards my kids and acted out in some other ways as well. And I love this kid. All right. I only had him in my house for 3 or 4 months, but he meant a lot to us as a family. And I still had to say, he's going to have to go to another home where there aren't smaller kids that might, be able to be influenced by him in particular ways. I don't want to go into a lot of specifics there. But I had to give him up, and it hurt me a lot, but I didn't I was going to say I did feel kind of personally guilty, I guess, a little bit, but you can go on and help the next person.
Yeah. And then sometimes that's all you can do. He just needed a foster environment without other kids so that he could start working on things that are going on there, hopefully.
Yes. And it wasn't his fault. He wasn't any more than the rest of us are bad people. He was not like an evil person. He had just been exposed to some things that hurt him and twisted his brain around in certain ways that, 3 and 4 year olds shouldn't have their brains exposed to.
Yeah. And so on that
wonderful, cheerful
upbeat note, thank you guys for listening to Bad Ideas. We really appreciate it. We love hearing about your bad ideas. Hit us up on Twitter @Human Echoes or badideasshow@gmail.com if you have ideas. Please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Human Echoes if you want access to early releases of various content, pins, all sorts of really cool stuff, and it's the best way to keep this show up and running. Tell your friends, and I hope you guys have an excellent week.
Thank you so much, guys. Bye.